It was a little past midnight when Officer Daniels received the call. The night was quiet in the small town he patrolled. Too quiet. The kind of silence where even the faint chirp of crickets felt like an intrusion. He had been parked near the edge of a wooded street, sipping lukewarm coffee from his travel mug, when the dispatcher's voice came through, low and urgent. Unit 12, respond to a possible home invasion. Caller reports an intruder inside the residence. Caller is whispering, sounds distressed. Address, 42 Millbrook Lane. Daniels straightened immediately. Millbrook Lane wasn't far, just a 5-minute drive. He turned on his lights, no sirens, not wanting to alert the suspect if there really was one. The closer he got, the more isolated the area seemed. Old houses, spread apart, half hidden by overgrown yards. Few street lamps, and most of them flickered or had already gone dark. By the time he reached number 42, his headlights were the only illumination. The house looked ordinary at first glance. A 2-story colonial with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. But something was off. The porch light wasn't steady. It blinked in an irregular rhythm, almost like it was keeping time with something unseen. Then Daniels noticed the front door. It was ajar. He parked, killed the engine, and approached carefully, hand on his weapon. He called out firmly, "Police, announce yourself." No answer. He pushed the door open slowly. The hinges squealed, the sound echoing through the still air inside. His flashlight cut a narrow path across the living room. Old furniture draped in sheets, dust swirling lazily in the beam. The faint smell of mildew mixed with something metallic, sharp almost like blood. He swept the room, then moved deeper inside. A staircase rose to the right. The kitchen stretched to the back. Everything felt frozen in time, as if the house had been left untouched for months. But the half-empty glass of water on the table suggested otherwise. "Ma'am," he called softly. "This is the police. Where are you?" No response, only the creak of the floorboards beneath his boots. He checked the kitchen. Empty. The dining room. Empty. Then he entered the hallway leading to the bedrooms. That was when his radio crackled. "Unit 12, confirm status." Daniels pressed the mic. "I'm inside the residence, no contact yet, house seems clear. Can you advise on the caller's location?" At first, silence. A long, uncomfortable silence. Then through the static came a whisper. A woman's voice, trembling, desperate. "He's still here." Daniels froze mid-step. His finger hovered over the trigger of his flashlight. "Dispatch, repeat that. Did you just say?" But dispatch cut in, their tone crisp and professional. "Negative, Unit 12. We didn't transmit anything just now." His mouth went dry. The voice hadn't come from dispatch. It hadn't sounded like any dispatcher he knew. He swept his light along the hallway walls and noticed something he'd missed before. Family photos, lined neatly in a row. But every single one had been defaced. The faces were gouged out with something sharp, the eyes scratched away, the smiles torn apart. Daniels felt a chill crawl up his spine. He raised the radio again. "Dispatch. Confirm. What number did the call come from?" Static filled the line for several seconds before dispatch replied. "Unit 12, we're checking. But so far no external number is showing in the log. Just your unit ID." Daniel stopped breathing for a moment. "Repeat that?" "The 911 call came through your radio, not from a phone line." That wasn't possible. His radio had been powered on but unused before dispatch sent him here. The sudden sound of footsteps echoed upstairs. Quick, heavy, like someone running. Daniel snapped his weapon up, heart pounding. He called out again. "Police, show yourself." No response, only silence. He climbed the stairs cautiously, each step groaning under his weight. At the top, a hallway stretched into darkness. All the bedroom doors were closed. He opened the first, empty. The second, also empty. Then he reached the third. The door stood half open. Inside, the beam of his flashlight revealed something strange. A rocking chair, slowly creaking back and forth on its own. Daniel's breath caught. He stepped closer, every instinct screaming to get out, but training kept him steady. The room smelled faintly of perfume, old, faded, but beneath it was something rancid. Suddenly, his radio burst to life again. The woman's voice, clearer this time, almost right in his ear. "Behind you." Daniel spun, weapon raised. Nothing, just the hallway, stretching into emptiness. His pulse hammered. Sweat trickled down his temple. He backed out of the room, gun still drawn, and made for the stairs. He'd seen enough. When he exited the house, the night air hit him like a wave of relief. He called for backup. Within 10 minutes, 2 more units arrived. Together, they searched the entire property, top to bottom. Every closet, every attic crawl space, every inch of the basement. Nothing, no intruder, no resident, no trace of anyone living there. The strangest part? The records showed the house had been abandoned for nearly 6 months, the utilities shut off. The family who once lived there had moved across the country. Yet the 911 call was real. Daniels had heard it with his own ears, and it had come through his radio. To this day, he refuses to patrol Millbrook Lane alone. And sometimes, late at night, when his unit falls silent, he swears he hears her voice again, just beneath the static, whispering warnings that never make sense. It was October of 1983 when the first call came in. The night was cold, damp from a day of rain, and the 2-lane highway cutting through southern Texas lay almost deserted. Around 11:40 p.m., a local farmer driving home from a livestock auction spotted something that made his headlights flicker strangely on the wet pavement. A police cruiser sitting on the shoulder. At first, he thought nothing of it. Officers often parked along this stretch to catch speeders. But as he drew closer, the details gnawed at him. The red and blue bar was flashing, though faintly, like it was running low on power. The engine was idling, exhaust puffing from the tailpipe into the cold night air. The driver's side door hung open, swinging slightly with the wind, and there was no officer. He slowed down, peered inside as he passed, and felt an icy unease crawl up his spine. The cabin light was on, illuminating a steaming cup of coffee in the holder, a pen resting uncapped on the passenger seat, as if someone had been writing only seconds earlier, and then vanished. The farmer drove straight to the nearest gas station with a payphone and called it in. When the responding unit arrived, they expected to find Officer Hensley somewhere nearby, perhaps speaking with a motorist or checking something in the ditch. But the scene told another story. The cruiser was still idling, driver's side door wide open. The radio was on, quietly hissing with static. The logbook sat on the seat, opened halfway through an entry, the pen still uncapped. The cup of coffee was still warm. It was as if Patrolman Richard Hensley had simply stepped out of his vehicle in mid-thought and never returned. The responding deputy called out into the dark fields, sweeping the roadside with a flashlight beam. Nothing but fog, mist rising from the wet ground, and the low buzz of insects in the grass. He radioed for backup. Within the hour, a full search party assembled. Deputies, state troopers, and local volunteers lined up along the highway, their lights forming a chain of white beams stretching into the woods. That was when they saw the footprints. Starting from the open door of the cruiser, they tracked Hensley's boots into the field and toward the tree line. At first, the steps were steady, deliberate, as if he had been walking. Then, Deeper into the mud, they grew frantic. Longer strides, heavy impressions. The prints turned erratic, zigzagging like he had been running. And then, nothing. The trail ended abruptly about 50 yards into the woods. No return tracks, no continuation, just vanished into soft earth. The dogs were brought in. They sniffed the ground, whined, circled. But every time they reached the spot where the footprints ended, they stopped. Some refused to move forward at all, pulling back on their leashes as if afraid of whatever lay ahead. Officers fanned out in wider circles calling his name. Hensley! Richard! Only the rustle of branches answered them. The forest swallowed the night. Back at the station, investigators went through the cruiser. They bagged the coffee cup, photographed the scene, examined the radio logs. Everything seemed ordinary, except for the dash-mounted camera. They rewound the tape and pressed play. It began with Hensley's patrol down the empty road. Rain droplets streaked across the windshield, headlights cutting through mist. Then, the cruiser slowed, pulled to the shoulder and stopped. Hensley stepped out, visible for just a second as he passed in front of the camera. After that, the picture showed only the empty highway. For several minutes, nothing happened. The low hum of the engine filled the audio. Then faintly, another sound crept in. Voices, not one, several. Low, layered, and out of rhythm with each other. Like murmurs carried by the wind, impossible to place. At times it almost resembled chanting, words rising and falling in a cadence that made no sense, yet carried an unsettling harmony. The sound grew stronger, closer. The tape flickered. The cruiser's headlights dimmed and brightened. And then, cutting sharply through the layered voices, came what sounded like a scream. Muffled, far away, but unmistakably human. The audio warped, drowned in static. The picture cut to black for nearly 30 seconds. When it returned, the cruiser still sat idling on the roadside, the driver's door wide open. No sign of Hensley. For 2 days, search efforts continued. Hundreds of acres of woods combed, helicopters overhead, rivers and ditches scoured. Nothing. Until hikers, nearly 3 miles from the highway, came across something unusual. In a small clearing, they found a man's body, kneeling upright, hands clasped together as if in prayer. His eyes were closed, his face calm, almost peaceful. It was Officer Richard Hensley. His service weapon was still holstered, his belt intact, his uniform unruffled, his boots muddy. The coroner's report baffled everyone. No bullet wounds, no stab marks, no blunt trauma. The official cause, cardiac arrest. But at 34 years old, Hensley had no history of heart issues. There were streaks of ash on his uniform, faint but noticeable, as if he had been close to a fire. Yet no signs of burning were found in the clearing, no remnants of a campfire, no scorched earth. The strangest detail was his hands. They were pressed together tightly, so tightly that even rigor mortis could not fully lock them in place. It was as though someone, or something, had forced them into a position of prayer. The department released a simple explanation: a tragic sudden medical condition. They avoided the dash cam tape entirely in public statements, claiming it had captured nothing unusual. But the officers who saw the tape whispered differently. They said the chanting went on much longer than was reported, that the tape ended not with silence but with a final phrase, something guttural, inhuman, spoken in unison by many voices. Others swore they heard Hensley himself, faint but clear, yelling for help just before the static swallowed everything. And there were darker rumors still. Officers claimed strange markings were found etched into the bark of trees near where Hensley was discovered. Symbols no one recognized. Jagged spirals, intersecting lines, shapes that made the eyes ache if stared at too long. None of that appeared in the official report. Weeks later, officers patrolling the same stretch of highway began reporting strange interference on their radios. Static, yes, but beneath it, voices. Faint, distorted, whispering. One deputy claimed the voice on the line spoke his name, drawn out, deliberate, almost taunting. Another said he heard laughter, low, slow, and not belonging to anyone in dispatch. Some swore they saw things on night patrol, faint lights flickering in the woods like lanterns swaying in the trees. Others claimed they saw a figure, a man in uniform, standing just beyond the beams of their headlights. But when they stepped out of their cars, there was nothing. The reports grew so frequent that officers quietly began avoiding the road at night. If they had to travel it, they drove faster, hands tightening on the wheel, eyes locked straight ahead. Even now, decades later, truckers still talk about that stretch of road. Some say they've seen a cruiser idling on the shoulder, lights flashing faintly. When they slow to look, it disappears. Others claim they've passed a man in uniform, standing at the tree line, his head bowed as though in prayer. And almost everyone agrees on one thing. If you travel that road after midnight, turn your radio off. Because sometimes, over the static, you'll hear it. The low hum of voices that don't belong. A chant that rises and falls without words, without meaning. Until the last phrase cuts through, sharp, clear, and cold. And if you hear your own name spoken in that chorus, don't stop. The college had always looked ordinary in the daytime. Wide staircases filled with chatter, long hallways buzzing with fluorescent lights, and lockers slamming as students rushed to their classes. But at night, when the classrooms emptied and the last professors left, the place transformed. The echo of footsteps carried too far. The silence between the flickering lights seemed heavier. And the third floor, always the third floor, became a place even seasoned janitors avoided. The legend began with Walter. Walter had been the college janitor for nearly 3 decades. He was the kind of man no one paid much attention to, yet everyone noticed when something was wrong. He moved through the school like a ghost even when he was alive, pushing his mop bucket, jangling his keys, and humming the same low tune that drifted down corridors like a lullaby. Students would sometimes see him in the background of their days, wiping chalkboards clean, tightening squeaky hinges, or oiling classroom doors that no one else bothered to fix. The building was his life. He had no family anyone knew of, no photographs on his desk, no home stories shared. The school was his entire world. On a frigid January evening sometime in the 1980s, Walter simply stopped. He was found sitting in the supply closet on the 3rd floor, his cap pulled low, one hand still holding onto his mop as though he'd only paused for a moment's rest. His heart had given out and he passed quietly, in the same hallways he'd cared for his whole life. The school mourned, of course, but buildings like that never stay still for long. The doors reopened, semesters rolled on, and new janitors were hired. Only the 3rd floor never felt the same. Not even a month after Walter's passing, odd things began to happen. One janitor, working the late shift, heard the unmistakable squeak of a mop bucket rolling slowly down the hallway. The sound echoed clearly in the empty building. He followed it, only to find a janitor's cart sitting neatly in the center of the corridor. Except, according to the sign-out sheet, no one had taken it from storage that night. Another worker reported something stranger. As he mopped the floors, he kept noticing wet footprints forming behind him. At first, he thought he was stepping in his own mop water. But when he stopped and stood still, more prints appeared, leading away from him, turning the corner into the darkness. By the end of that semester, staff had started whispering about Walter's ghost. Professors swore that classrooms left locked were somehow cleaned overnight, trash bins emptied, chalkboards spotless. One even claimed to have heard faint whistling in the corridor, Walter's old tune, long after midnight. But the story that truly cemented the haunting happened in the late 1990s. Eric was new. A young janitor, tough and skeptical, he wasn't afraid of old ghost stories. When the senior staff teased him about cleaning the third floor alone, he laughed it off and wheeled his cart upstairs around 2 a.m. The floor was silent at first, just the buzz of tired fluorescent lights overhead. The air smelled faintly of dust and cleaning chemicals. As Eric pushed his mop forward, he noticed something peculiar. The hallway floor already gleamed, as though someone else had been there minutes before him. Then came the sound, a low humming, steady, almost familiar. He froze. Ahead of him, emerging from the far end of the corridor, was a man. Gray hair tucked under a janitor's cap, uniform pressed, mop in hand. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge Eric at all. He just pushed his squeaking mop bucket forward, mopping the tiles in long, slow strokes. Eric tried to call out, but his voice caught in his throat. The figure kept working, moving farther down the hallway until the light flickered, and he was gone. All that remained were fresh streaks of wet water shimmering on the floor. Eric dropped his mop and bolted. He never came back. Over the years, the encounters grew darker. A security guard once claimed he saw a man standing by the windows at the far end of the third floor. Thinking it was a trespasser, he shouted, but the figure didn't move. When the guard walked closer, his flashlight cut through the dim hallway, only to find the space empty. But when he turned back toward the elevator, every classroom door he had walked past was now standing wide open. Students studying late in the library reported hearing keys jangling outside the third floor entrance. When they peeked out, the hallway was empty, but the smell of industrial floor cleaner lingered in the air. Others said they felt it physically, a cold draft in rooms with no windows. The sound of slow footsteps following them down the hallway, matching their pace, until they finally ran down the stairs. Some swore they even heard whispering, an old man's voice, scolding softly, like Walter used to when students made a mess. To this day, no one lingers on the third floor past midnight. Janitors rotate shifts, but many refuse outright to clean there alone. Even professors lock their doors quickly and avoid late-night grading upstairs. They say Walter never left because he had nowhere else to go. The college was his family, his home, his life, and so he keeps working, long after death, polishing the same floors, whistling the same tune, and making sure the building never falls into disrepair. And so the warning spreads to every new hire. If you hear the squeak of a mop bucket in the dead of night, do not turn around. Walter is still there, making sure his floors stay clean, forever. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.